Hi, I'm Leorin. It was Christmas Eve when my dad looked me straight in the eye and called me a parasite. Said I'd been clinging for too long, like the 7 years I spent running his company for free were just charity. They said I was family, that I was earning my future. But behind every thank you, they erased me. One decision, one credit, one signature at a time. Until the day I took it all back and left a USB on his desk. But here's what no one asked me. What does it feel like to burn down the only home you ever had, just to finally be seen? Would you do it too? The ham was overcooked, again. I stood over the kitchen counter, silently scraping the charred bits off the edges like a ritual I'd learned over the last 7 years. No one would say anything, of course. They never did. Not about the food, not about the effort, not about me. I could have served a gourmet 3-course meal or a box of frozen chicken nuggets, and the reaction would be the same. Vague nods, awkward silence, maybe a condescending, "You tried." The house was glowing. I'd spent hours the night before stringing lights down the stairwell, arranging pine garlands across the mantel, and making sure every stocking was hung with care, including the one labeled Seraphine, which, let's be honest, hadn't been touched by anyone but me since she moved out. I even cleaned the smudges off the wine glasses, because that's what you do when you're the one who holds everything together and gets no credit for it. I was checking on the dinner rolls when I heard his voice behind me. "Make sure Seraphine doesn't lift a finger tonight, okay? She's had a long week." I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Vernon, my father, always said what he meant without ever really saying it. I was used to it, the way he moved around me, not with warmth, but like I was an appliance that hummed too loudly. I nodded once, then adjusted the oven dial. No comment, just like he preferred. People started arriving just after 5. I opened the door with the same smile I wore every year, a mix of tired and too polite. My Aunt Margaret handed me a pie I didn't ask for. My cousin Darren brought his new fiancé, who tried too hard with everyone and looked scared to touch the furniture. Seraphine was the last to arrive. She pulled up in that sleek electric car Vernon had leased through the company last month. A PR stunt, he'd said, brand building. She stepped out looking like she'd walked off a corporate lifestyle ad, heels clicking, coat perfectly draped, not a hair out of place. And when she smiled for the cameras, yes, there were actual photos being taken for the family newsletter, I realized she'd perfected what I never could, being exactly what they wanted. Celesta, my mother, came up behind me just as I was arranging the charcuterie board on the table. "Don't make tonight about you, sweetheart," she whispered. "Just let things go smoothly." I wanted to ask her, what exactly was it that I had to let go of? 7 years of labor, the nights I'd driven through storms to check on inventory, the staff I'd trained, the systems I'd built, the spreadsheets I updated while Seraphine went live on Instagram from Maui. But I didn't say anything. I adjusted the salami roses. Dinner started a little after 6. Everyone had a drink in hand, thanks to me stocking the bar cart. Laughter echoed from the dining room, mostly about things I wasn't involved in. Seraphine's leadership summit last month, my cousin's podcast, someone's startup. I passed the gravy and the cranberry sauce, refilled glasses, made sure the turkey was carved correctly. I handled the seating chart, down to placing Vernon's highball glass exactly where he liked it, 3 inches to the right of his plate, ice always on the left. Toasts came next. Vernon stood, cleared his throat, and raised his glass. "To family," he began, "and to legacy, to our future." He turned and looked directly at Seraphine. "She's been doing incredible work. We're proud of her." A round of applause followed. I sat there quietly, my fork hovering over mashed potatoes I no longer had an appetite for. A neighbor, someone from Vernon's golf club, leaned in and asked, "And what does your younger daughter do again?" Vernon chuckled. "She's still figuring things out," he said, with a grin that never touched his eyes, clinging to the idea that she's irreplaceable. I froze. My hand gripped the napkin under the table. Every muscle in my face went stiff, but I forced a smile, tight, practiced. No one corrected him, not Celesta, not Seraphine. No one said, "Actually, Leorin runs the day-to-day." No one added, "She's been holding this place up since you retired to Cabo." They just let it pass. I swallowed the lump in my throat and reached for my water glass. But before I could lift it, Vernon turned again, this time straight toward me. His voice, casual but sharp enough to cut through every noise in the room. "Stop clinging, you're almost 30, he said. Then, like a final stab, "You're a parasite, Lyron. You've been living off us for too long." The room went still. Even the fork that fell from someone's hand didn't dare to make a sound. I stared at him. I blinked. Once, no one said a word. Seraphine looked at her nails. Celesta looked at her plate. Darren looked away. And me? I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't flip the table or storm out or throw wine in anyone's face like some cheap movie. I sat there, very still. Inside, my mind screamed. My chest ached in that strange way when pain is too old, too familiar to register as new. My fingers trembled slightly, resting on the linen napkin. My jaw locked. I wasn't surprised. That was the worst part. What stunned me wasn't the insult. It was how easy it had been for him to say it, how casually he labeled me, how comfortable everyone was with my silence. I looked around the table. Every face I loved once, now suspended in still life. Indifferent, detached, distracted. I mentally took roll. Who flinched? Who looked sorry? Who looked pleased? I memorized them all. And then I set my fork down, quietly. That was the last moment I belonged to them. I stood from the dinner table with the kind of quiet that only years of training could make look effortless. I didn't storm off, didn't knock over a chair. God forbid I make anyone uncomfortable. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, rinsed my glass in the sink, and made my way down the narrow staircase to the basement like I was walking into a tomb I'd built myself. The basement had always been my space, though calling it mine felt like a stretch. It was unfinished, cement floor, exposed insulation in places, one window that didn't open. Still, I'd made it livable. A second-hand rug, a lopsided bookshelf, a tiny fridge humming in the corner. There was no lock on the door, not even a real knob, just a handle Vernon installed temporarily 7 years ago. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my holiday sweater, the one with the stitched holly leaves that Mom once said made me look festive enough, but not like I was trying too hard. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I grabbed it without thinking, more out of muscle memory than intention. The screen lit up with a notification, Instagram. Normally, I wouldn't have bothered. But something in me, raw and restless, made my thumb tap the app. There it was, freshly posted. A picture of Seraphine, standing in front of the office's main conference table, holding a glass plaque. Employee Excellence, etched in silver. My fingers clenched instinctively. The caption read, "Proud of Seraphine, leading the charge in our future. Family account. Tagged. At Vernon Business Consulting. The same plaque I'd ordered, the same client pitch I'd created, the same contract I'd negotiated, the same damn project Seraphine had barely shown up to, where she forgot the client's name and asked if they still sold fax machines. I remember covering for her when she skipped the final call, claiming she had a migraine. She was at a wine spa in Calistoga. I remember because I had to reschedule my dentist appointment that day to handle it myself. That post had been live for 11 minutes. 42 likes. One comment from a board member. Leadership looks good on her. I scrolled again. Another post. A group shot. Company anniversary dinner from October. I'd taken the photo myself, standing behind the camera at Vernon's request because you have the best eye for these things. I wasn't in the picture. The caption read, "Our leadership family." No tag for me, no mention, just smiling faces. Vernon at the center, Celesta holding a wine glass, Seraphine laughing like she had nothing to prove. I set the phone down and stared at the wall. The drywall wasn't even painted. There were marks from where I once tried to hang shelves, and they collapsed under the weight of real books. I stood and walked to my desk, opened the drawer, pulled out the stack of printed emails I kept, not out of spite, but because after a while, you start to need evidence that you existed, that you mattered, that you didn't make it all up. Near the bottom was one from last spring. Vernon had forwarded it to a consulting partner. "We're moving forward with Seraphine heading phase 2. Lyron's still helping out. For now." I remember that week. I was managing back-to-back meetings, training 2 interns, and covering payroll because mom forgot to submit it. That Friday, I stayed up till 2 a.m., fixing the new onboarding deck that Seraphine was supposed to finish. I didn't complain. I figured they'd notice the results. Apparently, they had. They just gave someone else the credit. I dropped into the desk chair, my legs suddenly heavier than they'd been a minute ago. The same feeling you get when you've walked too far in shoes that don't fit, but you've worn them so long, you forgot they weren't yours to begin with. I pulled out an old notebook from the drawer. It was worn, the spiral slightly bent. Inside were handwritten process notes, system workflows, invoice templates, even email phrasing I used to handle tense clients. Pages and pages of the kind of work no one celebrates, but without which everything falls apart. I flipped through it slowly, and as I did, something inside me began to still, not like calm, but like stone. They weren't just ignoring me, they were replacing me, piece by piece. In photos, in captions, in board meetings, in emails. They were erasing my name from a history I built with my bare hands. And the worst part? They were doing it with smiles on their faces and words like legacy and family sewn into the hems of their speeches. I didn't post anything. I didn't call anyone. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. I just sat there, turning the pages of that notebook until the words blurred. I wasn't going to fight for acknowledgement anymore, but I was going to make sure they could never erase me again. The next morning, I made coffee like always. But this time, I didn't pour a cup for anyone else. There wasn't a tray to balance, no stack of napkins to fold, no list taped to the fridge for what needed to be reheated by the time Vernon woke up. The house was unusually quiet, probably because no one wanted to face me, or maybe they were too busy rewriting the Christmas narrative in their heads already. Either way, I stayed out of the way. I sat at the small table in the corner of the basement that passed as my dining area, even though it was more like an afterthought beside my storage boxes. That's when I remembered the box I hadn't touched in almost a year. It was tucked under the folding table, wedged behind a set of expired printer ink and a box of light bulbs that didn't fit any sockets in this house. I pulled it out and set it on the floor. The cardboard edges were frayed, the tape dry and cracking. I peeled the top open, slow, as if I were opening a wound I'd spent years pretending didn't exist. Inside, printouts of invoices, client briefs, hand-annotated budget sheets, all with my initials in the margins. The first page was dated 2016, titled Q1 Payroll Adjustments. I recognized the note at the top in Celesta's handwriting. Can you help with this while Dad recovers? Shouldn't take more than a few weeks. A few weeks became 7 years. I lifted the stack, letting it thump onto the desk beside me. Each packet had notes in different inks, my own red markings correcting Vernon's math, my blue circles flagging Seraphine's missed deadlines, even green sticky notes reminding Celesta to submit reports she'd forget every month like clockwork. As I sorted through the papers, the timeline of my disappearance into the company unfolded, piece by piece. There was the summer I canceled a trip to Portland because Vernon forgot to tell me about a last-minute board meeting. The fall, I stayed up 3 nights in a row, fixing a corrupted server backup, while Seraphine was posting margarita selfies from Tulum. The pages blurred as memory layered over memory. The day I ran payroll on my birthday, because no one else remembered it was my birthday. The email from a client congratulating Seraphine on a strategy I designed from scratch. I remember forwarding it to Dad, thinking he'd correct the mistake. He didn't reply. They said I was earning my future. That was the phrase Vernon used when I asked about compensation after year 2. We're setting you up, kid. Stick with it. I stuck with it through system crashes, tax filings, employee meltdowns, and that brief crisis when Celesta used the wrong routing number and nearly bounced a $12,000 vendor payment. I was the invisible glue. And now, apparently, I was also disposable. The rain tapped lightly on the basement window. I looked up and traced the crack that ran across the pane. I'd asked Vernon to fix it 4 times last winter. Eventually, I patched it myself with clear tape and silicone. Just like the ceiling leak above my bed. Every spring, it dripped when the rains hit. I'd stack bowls to catch the water and dump them into the bathroom sink in the morning before anyone noticed. Meanwhile, upstairs, Seraphine had a queen bed, a skylight, and fresh paint twice a year. It wasn't just the money. It was the narrative. They built an empire off my labor and then wrote me out of the credits, like I was an extra who wandered onto set and never left. I picked up the photo tucked behind one of the folders. It was from the early days, when I still believed their promises. I was sitting at my desk, grinning, laptop open with sticky notes lined along the edge. Celesta had taken the photo. She'd captioned it on Facebook. Our secret weapon. Funny. Now I was just a parasite. I closed the box slowly, like sealing a vault full of ghosts. There was a kind of quiet inside me now. Not the numbness from the night before, not quite anger either. More like a recognition, a shift. I looked around my basement room. My entire world was boxed within 200 square feet. Desk, bed, fridge, storage. I wasn't a daughter in this house. I wasn't a partner. I was staff. The kind that didn't get benefits or even a name tag. I reached for my laptop, powered it on. While it booted, I went to the small fridge and grabbed the last yogurt. I ate standing up, one hand on the keyboard, as I opened a fresh document. Title: Operational Handover Summary, Personal Archive. I began typing out everything I had built: process flows, passwords, vendor contacts, staff preferences. I wasn't just documenting, I was taking inventory of what was mine and what had been taken. Midway through, I heard footsteps creaking above. Vernon's voice filtered down the vents, sharp and impatient, something about missing files. Celesta responded with her usual fluttery tones, probably suggesting I must have misplaced something again. I paused the typing, looked at the blinking cursor, then hit save. It was past midnight now, the storm still whispering against the windows. I stood and stretched, my back tight from hours hunched over spreadsheets and unspoken resentment. I whispered out loud, just once, just for me. They built an empire off of me, but made sure no one knew. No more. They didn't have to know what I was doing. Not yet. But soon, they'd remember exactly who kept the lights on all these years. That night, I didn't cry. I opened my laptop instead. I pulled my legs up under me on the basement couch, still in the jeans and sweater I'd worn since morning, my hair tied in a messy knot that had long since loosened. The cursor blinked against a blank screen, and I stared at it, not because I didn't know what to write, but because I knew too much. But before I could begin drafting the list, I had in my head what I'd done, what I'd built, what they'd taken. I heard footsteps upstairs, heavy ones, familiar. I paused, ears tuned. Then Vernon's voice cut through the floorboards. I need you to print something, he barked. I minimized the screen, closed the laptop, and climbed the stairs. In the office, the door was ajar. He was on the phone, headset tucked behind his ear, clicking through tabs on his desktop. His tone was smooth, his presentation voice. I'd heard it used on investors, vendors, even judges during a zoning dispute years ago. That voice always meant he was selling something. I waited by the door until he glanced over and motioned me in. Need you to run the printer again. Should be in the downloads folder. I moved behind him and opened the file, just as he muttered to his caller. Yes, we're aiming for the transition in Q2. The paperwork is in motion. Seraphine will step in fully by March. It'll be seamless. My hand hovered over the mouse. I read the subject line, Leadership Realignment, Phase 2. The document loaded on screen, board draft, signatures pending. Seraphine listed as Incoming Managing Partner, Vernon as Senior Strategic Advisor. My name was nowhere, not even a footnote. I didn't say anything. I printed the file, handed it to him, and walked back out without a word. My face didn't flinch, but my insides felt like someone had reached through my ribcage and pulled out my lungs. I didn't go back downstairs. I walked into the laundry room, cold, cramped, and barely lit, and leaned against the dryer. My hands gripped the edge until my knuckles whitened. They weren't just planning to replace me, they'd already done it. And I was expected to… What? Keep doing the books? Training? Inventory? Smile through holiday dinners, while Seraphine posed for promotional photos in the office I managed alone. Later that afternoon, while I was folding towels that weren't mine, Celesta poked her head into the laundry room. Can you tidy the guest room upstairs? She asked. The investors are visiting tomorrow and it's a little chaotic in there. The room Seraphine's been using? I asked, folding a corner too sharply. She nodded, her voice soft and too bright. You just have such a way of making things presentable. I stared at her. She didn't notice, or pretended not to. I'll leave the Lysol by the door, she added, already walking away. I went upstairs a half hour later. The guest room, no, her room, was a disaster. Makeup spilled on the dresser, empty takeout containers on the floor, clothing draped across furniture like a boutique explosion. It smelled like perfume and entitlement. As I opened the window to let in some air, a memory hit me hard and fast. Seraphine at 14, drunk on boxed wine she'd stolen from the garage. Me, 15, cleaning red stains out of the carpet before our parents got home. She was laughing, slurring, calling me a buzzkill. I remember dabbing the carpet with vinegar and club soda while she lay in bed scrolling on her phone. Another memory. I was 17. She forgot to mail in her scholarship paperwork. Panicked. Told mom and dad I'd hacked her account to delete it. I took the blame, quietly rewrote the forms, and sent them overnight express from my allowance. Seraphine always made the messes. I was always the one holding the mop. I finished tidying the room in silence. When I turned to leave, I noticed the company's mission statement framed on her nightstand. Excellence through family-driven leadership. I laughed. It slipped out involuntarily. Dry, hollow. That night, Vernon found me in the kitchen. He'd just poured himself a scotch and leaned against the island with that smug, father-knows-best posture he always used when delivering ultimatums masked as advice. Don't let your pride get in the way, he said casually. There's still a place for you here if you stay useful, not valued, not respected, useful, like a wrench or a broom. I looked him straight in the eye for the first time in days. Is that what I am to you? I asked. A tool? He blinked slowly. Don't twist this. You've always been reliable, Leorin. You do the work no one else wants to. That's not praise, Dad. That's a warning label. He scoffed, took a sip, and left the glass on the counter without rinsing it. I waited until he left the room before I washed it. Old habits. But that night, something inside me settled. Not like dust, but like cement. I wasn't angry that they'd forgotten me. I was angry that I'd let them. That night, I unlocked the drive I'd kept hidden for over a year. I didn't light a candle, or put on soft music, or sip tea like people do in movies when they're having an epiphany. I just pulled the laptop onto my knees, the same one with a busted spacebar and a screen that flickered when the battery dipped too low, and I started sorting. There were folders upon folders, files named in codes only I understood. Q3 vendor Aglar was my adjustment to a failing supplier contract that Vernon nearly blew. ONB Template 2021 RL was the onboarding guide Seraphine said she wrote. I knew exactly which one it was because I wrote every word, formatting and all, in the basement over a Thanksgiving weekend while the rest of them were skiing in Lake Tahoe. At some point, the air grew colder. I didn't notice until my toes went numb. I hadn't moved in hours. I was deep in this cave of proof. Every receipt, every SOP, every training log, every timeline of me fixing what they ruined while they were smiling on social media. A new email popped up, one from a client I hadn't spoken to in months. Hey, Lyran. Hope you're well. Tried working with Seraphine. She couldn't answer basic project status. Everything okay on your end? My stomach didn't drop. I didn't gasp. I just closed my eyes and breathed, long and slow. It wasn't just me anymore. They were starting to see it, too. I replied politely, professionally, and directly from my private inbox, the one that wasn't linked to the family server. I thanked him, said I'd check into it, and added a line at the end that meant more to me than he'd ever know. Appreciate you reaching out directly. Before shutting the laptop, I created a new folder on the desktop. Proof of contribution. Inside, I dragged everything. My training guides, staff memos, client success plans, even the call logs from years ago where I walked Seraphine through basic deliverables while she was on mute because, in her words, I don't sound confident on Zoom. Mid-morning, I was making myself another cup of coffee when I heard the doorbell ring. It was too early for guests and too late for deliveries. I stayed in the basement, waiting to see if someone else would answer. But then I heard Isolda's voice. I just need to give her something. Footsteps, then a knock on my door. I opened it. Isolda stood there holding a slim folder, her coat soaked through from rain. She handed it over without a word. What's this? I asked. Dad gave me a box to drop off with old files. That was inside. He probably didn't check it. I opened the folder. Inside was a signed transition agreement, dated 6 weeks ago. It stated that Seraphine would assume full managing control of the company, effective Q2. Under current operator, it said, Lyron, formerly supporting administration, holds no official management designation and has no authority on strategic decisions. I couldn't breathe for a second, not because I didn't expect this, but because of how cleanly they wrote me out, like a footnote, like I was never real. I looked up at Isolda. You knew? She shook her head. I didn't. Not until I saw your name was missing. I figured you should see it yourself. I stared at the signature line, Vernon's bold, self-assured pen strokes, Celesta's delicate loops. Seraphine's practiced cursive, all there, all agreeing to erase me. I walked back to the desk and scanned it into the drive. Thanks for dropping it off, I said quietly. Isolda hesitated in the doorway. You okay? No, I replied, but I'm awake. She nodded once. If you need help, just say it. I didn't respond, not because I was angry at her, but because she'd stayed quiet through so much of this that I didn't know how to let her back in yet. Maybe I would, but not now. That evening, we had dinner together as a family, for the first time since Christmas Eve. Celesta had made roast chicken, Vernon carved it like always, and Seraphine sat across from me scrolling on her phone between bites. No one said anything about the email I'd intercepted. No one mentioned the folder, but I saw the shift. Vernon looked at me a little longer than usual. Celesta was more chipper than necessary. Seraphine offered me the last biscuit, which felt more like a distraction than a peace offering. Halfway through the meal, I set my fork down and spoke. If you continue pretending I don't exist in this company, you may find yourselves with no company left to pass on. Silence. Vernon smirked. Don't be dramatic, Leorin. Celesta tilted her head, voice sweet and polished. You wouldn't hurt your family. We've all sacrificed so much. I took a sip of water, steady and calm. You're right, I wouldn't hurt my family. But you... I glanced at each of them, one by one. You stopped being my family the moment you decided I was disposable. Seraphine snorted. Come on, Leo. You've always been the quiet one. That's your thing. I stared at her, not blinking. Quiet isn't the same as compliant. I excused myself after that, leaving my plate half full. I walked back down to the basement, shut the door, and exhaled. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't stutter. I opened the drive, labeled the next folder. Client roster, updated access only. Then I renamed the old one. Legacy, before me. That night, I didn't sleep, but for the first time, I didn't feel tired. By the time the morning sun rose, they no longer owned what they had built off me. It started just past midnight. I was still in my basement room, the air heavy and silent, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm, or after one, depending on who's telling the story. I'd already finished my silent dinner, folded laundry that wasn't mine, and responded to a few work emails from clients who didn't know they were about to get a new point of contact. I pulled the armchair closer to the closet, unscrewed the panel I'd hidden years ago behind a row of fake storage bins, and retrieved the drive. It was a small black USB, no label, because that would have been too obvious. I tucked it into my back pocket and climbed the stairs. The house creaked like it knew what I was about to do. The hardwood beneath my feet groaned just slightly under each step, but I didn't stop. I moved carefully through the hallway, past the family photos where I was barely visible, always off to the side, always a step behind. I passed the kitchen, where a single overhead light flickered above the island. past the dining room where the chairs were still crooked from our last awkward family meal. Vernon's office was at the end of the hall. The door was unlocked, because why would he think to lock it? The room reeked of scotch and importance. Leather chair, heavy desk, awards on the wall. All of it meant to show power. The monitor was still on, dim to sleep mode. I pressed the spacebar and the login screen came up. I typed the credentials I'd created for him 2 years ago, the same ones he never changed. I was in. I inserted the drive. It didn't take long. I had built the infrastructure. Every account was still under admin rights that technically belonged to operations, which was me. They never updated ownership. They never bothered to question the back end. As long as the emails were answered and the payroll was submitted, no one cared who was behind the curtain. First, I revoked their logins. Vernon, Celesta, Seraphine, gone. Then, I updated the banking credentials, rerouted all operational access to a new account I had opened under my name last month, just in case. I changed the passwords for the CRM, the vendor portals, the document systems. I filed an entity update with the Secretary of State, designation, managing partner, name, Liar and Veil. Everything legal, everything time-stamped. When it was done, I copied the core folders, client lists, process documentation, archived reports, onto a new USB. On the casing, I'd written, "Everything you'll need." I left it in the center of Vernon's desk. I didn't leave a note. He wouldn't need one. He'd know. Earlier that day, I'd found my SOP guide in Seraphine's room, the one I spent 4 years writing, testing, perfecting. It had been reprinted, reformatted, and rebound under a glossy new title, Seraphine's Leadership Manual. I stared at it for a long time when I found it, wondering if I'd be angry or just tired, but I felt nothing. A kind of detachment that only comes when a wound has scarred so thoroughly you forget how it started bleeding in the first place. That guide had been mine, the late nights, the trial and error, the staff feedback, the endless revisions. And now it sat on her shelf like a trophy for a race she never ran. I didn't throw it. I didn't tear it up. I simply took a picture of the cover and filed it away with everything else I planned to use, if they ever pushed back. Back in Vernon's office, I did one last sweep of the system. Everything was in order. Every move I made had a trail, a timestamp, and legal backing. By 3:17 a.m., I was packing. I didn't own much, just one suitcase, a laptop, the drive, and a folder of essential documents. I left the rest. The mugs I bought from the office break room, the planner no one ever noticed me carrying, the photos of staff parties where I stood behind the camera, all of it stayed. I moved quietly down the stairs, past the kitchen again. I paused just long enough to wipe down the counters, because old habits die hard. At the front door, I turned around for one last glance, not at the house, but at the shadow of myself I was leaving behind, the version of me that believed loyalty was the same as love. I stepped outside. The air was sharp. It smelled like wet concrete and new beginnings. My car was already packed. I climbed in, started the engine, and didn't look back. Driving away felt less like escape and more like release. I didn't cry. I didn't even play music. I just drove. 6 hours later, I pulled into a small rental property outside Bend. It wasn't glamorous, bare floors, mismatched furniture, but it was mine, and no one had ever called me a parasite in its kitchen. By the time the sun peeked through the blinds, I was sipping a cheap cup of diner coffee at a table that wobbled when I leaned too hard. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. 5 missed calls, 2 voicemails, one from Vernon, one from Celesta. I let them sit. I powered on my laptop, logged into the system, my system, and watched the notifications roll in. User access denied, credential mismatch, bank routing updated. And just like that, it began. I didn't sleep the night after the switch. There was no dramatic sunrise, no triumphant exhale, just the glow of my laptop screen illuminating the room as I watched it all unfold. One system after another, one line of access after the next, shift fully under my control. No chaos, no sabotage, just correction. I had mapped every access point. I had reviewed each authorization, every layer of admin control. And with one final sweep, the digital handover was complete. Years of silent work. Years of being the one behind the curtain. Years of letting them think it was their company. But it wasn't. It had always been mine, held together by my discipline, my documentation, my unwillingness to collapse under pressure. Now the balance had shifted, not out of spite, but out of necessity. By dawn on the 29th, the messages began. The first was from Vernon, short, clipped. Can't log into the CRM. Fix it. As if nothing had changed, as if we were still playing that game. Then came Celesta. Sweetheart, I think something's wrong with the website. I'm seeing your name listed as the point of contact. Was that intentional? It was almost tender the way she phrased it. Almost. The messages came steadily after that, trickling into a flood. By noon, the inbox was ablaze. Notifications stacked like bricks in a wall. Seraphine's voicemail came next, her voice taut with the kind of rage that only thrives on entitlement. You hijacked everything. You've made this company look unstable. Clients are confused. Do you even realize what this is doing to our brand? I didn't respond. Instead, I closed my email, finished my coffee, took another bite of toast. I had no appetite for dramatics. I'd had my fill of those under their leadership. The website had been updated overnight. My credentials were now listed across every public-facing platform. Under the About tab, my title appeared clearly: Managing Director, Operations Strategy, Lyre and Veil Seraphine's photos, posing with investors, clutching champagne flutes, smiling through borrowed authority, were gone. The tagline Vernon had insisted on keeping, Legacy through Leadership, had been replaced with something cleaner, bolder, Integrity through Action, no press release, no announcement. Just a quiet change that made everything clear. By mid-afternoon, I checked the back-end analytics. Client activity was up. 2 partners had emailed me directly. One wrote, "Glad to see the right person finally at the helm. Let's talk." It wasn't revenge. It was resonance. Later that evening, while editing a series of invoice templates to reflect our new structure, a system notification flashed in red across my screen. Alert. High-risk transaction flagged. Account holder, Lyre and Veil. Amount, $90,000. Date of issue, June 18, 2020. I stared at the screen. My chest tightened, not with fear, but something colder, clearer. I opened the file. It was a loan agreement, signed in my name, issued through a private credit fund. I vaguely remembered Vernon mentioning in passing during a meeting I hadn't been invited to. The signature was almost mine, but not quite. The L curled too tightly, the slant on the V wrong. Forged. I downloaded the file, attached it to an email to my attorney, and wrote, "Possible identity fraud. Confirmed forged signature. Please advise on immediate next steps." The system flagged another alert. Seraphine had attempted to log in through a ghost account, an admin-level shadow login I'd discovered and disabled 2 days ago. The system had auto-locked the breach and sent a prepared warning: unauthorized login attempt detected. Legal action pending if breach is repeated. I imagined her reaction, her face tightening, hand clenched around the phone. I didn't smile. I didn't feel triumphant. I just clicked archive. The next message was a voice memo. Vernon. His tone wasn't confused or remorseful. It was venomous. "You ungrateful little liar. This was all built for you. We gave you the chance to be part of something that matters, and you spit on it. You think this makes you powerful? You're a traitor." I listened to it twice, not because I needed to believe it, but because part of me still searched, fruitlessly, for something human in his voice, something fatherly, a trace of love, even if tangled in rage. But there was nothing. Only ego. Only control. I forwarded the memo to my attorney with the subject line, "Verbal harassment, for record." That night, I stepped outside onto the porch of my rental. The house was small, nestled into a quiet neighborhood outside Bend. The kind of place you'd drive past without noticing, but it was mine. Temporarily, at least. And right now, it felt like a sanctuary. The air was sharp, the sky crystal clear. Stars scattered wide and without apology. I let the cold sting my cheeks, let the silence settle around me. Inside, the notifications kept arriving. The last was from Seraphine. No anger this time, just desperation. This isn't just hurting the business, it's hurting our reputation. Mine, Dad's. You're dragging us down with you. I stood, staring at the screen, then turned toward the desk. Framed on its surface was a copy of the Standard Operating Procedures Manual, the real one, the original draft. Dated, sourced, written by me. Every policy, every contract template, every process Seraphine had tried to claim as hers. I whispered aloud, "No, I'm not dragging anyone. I'm just climbing out." And I meant it. That night, while the house in Sacramento undoubtedly filled with shouting and blame, with panic and frantic phone calls that couldn't be returned, I stayed where I was. In the quiet. In the calm. I wrapped myself in a blanket, poured tea, and updated the access protocols for every system they'd once ruled with impunity. They had built a castle on my shoulders, and I had finally stepped away. But even with everything returned, something inside me still wasn't whole. The lawsuit had gone out at 8:07 a.m. January 2nd, 2 days after New Year's, when the world was still dragging itself out of holiday fog. But I wasn't fogged anymore. I was wide awake, wide enough to see every detail of what they had done, and more importantly, what they thought I would never do. My attorney, Deirdre, a sharp woman who wore silence like armor, sent the filings with a precision I respected. The documents were airtight. The forged loan application, screenshots of overwritten authorship files, timelines of unpaid labor, backup from past employees, and a 30-page appendix with internal communications that gradually erased me from my own position. Every detail labeled, sourced, dated. She called me that afternoon. "It's done," she said, voice steady. "They've been served." I was sitting at my temporary desk in Bend, surrounded by moving boxes I hadn't bothered to unpack yet. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, but I didn't notice until I touched it. "How long do you think before they go public?" I asked. Deirdre paused. "They won't go first, not until they've tried to control the narrative." And she was right. By nightfall, a local business journal had picked up the filing, leaked by an anonymous source, probably someone on the clerk's team. The headline was simple: "Family consulting firm hit with fraud allegations from within." The article didn't name me, not directly, but it mentioned internal restructuring, accusations of misappropriated authorship, and the word inheritance more than once, enough for those who knew to connect the dots, enough to stir the pot. That same night, Celesta posted a Facebook status. "Some children forget the hands that fed them, but that's the world now. We gave everything. We taught respect. Some just don't remember love when they see it." And the comments started pouring in, but not the kind she expected. Aunt Mara wrote, "Didn't Leorin run that place for years while y'all were traveling?" Uncle Pete added, "Last I checked, she was the one fixing Vernon's mess with that audit." Even a former employee chimed in, "Taught respect? Is that what you call having her do all the grunt work while Seraphine got the press photos?" Celesta didn't reply. She deleted the post within hours. But by then, screenshots were already circulating. By the next morning, I received a message from one of our longtime clients, someone I'd walked through 3 separate crises, someone I'd built trust with for over 5 years. "Just read the article. We're staying with you. Whatever they say, we know who did the work." That one line did something inside me that no legal victory ever could. It touched the quiet ache that had lived beneath all the noise, the ache that wanted not praise, but recognition. Later that day, Vernon called. It was the first time I'd heard his voice in weeks. No voicemail this time. He spoke when I picked up. "You were supposed to carry this," he said. Not angry, just broken. "You were the only one who knew how." I let silence fill the space between us. Then I answered. "And you built it by making sure I was never seen. Now you finally feel what I felt." He didn't argue, just breathed heavily, then hung up. I didn't call back. By week's end, the dominoes were falling. Seraphine lost 2 paid speaking gigs. A podcast she co-hosted quietly replaced her with another consultant. Clients stopped tagging her in project updates. Her LinkedIn became a ghost town. The company, what was left of it, defaulted on 3 outstanding vendor accounts. The office lease, once a point of pride, was being terminated early. A liquidation firm began assessing furniture and equipment. Vernon formally stepped down from all board affiliations. No public statement, just an update in the records. A quiet bow out of relevance. Celesta's blog, rooted in grace, lost its sponsorship deals. A few lifestyle brands pulled out. Her subscriber count dipped. The comment section turned skeptical, even hostile. Someone shared a clip of her praising the invisible work of daughters, juxtaposed with the fraud case. It went viral in a way no curated post of hers ever had. I didn't watch the clip. I didn't need to. Back in Bend, I filed the final paperwork to close the joint business account they'd left in limbo. My name was clean now. Credit restored. I'd filed for damages, but it was never about the money. It was about reclaiming the version of myself they had buried under gratitude and obligation. And I didn't gloat. I didn't give an interview. I didn't post a quote about rising from ashes. I got up every morning, made my own coffee, updated my client workflows, and built my own practice, brick by digital brick. There were no champagne toasts, no final confrontation with the dramatic line that wrapped it all up in a bow. Only quiet and space, and a version of me I was finally starting to recognize. The morning light that filtered through the sheer curtains in my apartment didn't bring clarity. It didn't wrap me in peace or lift the weight off my chest the way I thought it might. It just came, soft, golden, indifferent. I sat at the kitchen table, still in my robe, fingers wrapped around a lukewarm mug of tea. The silence in my apartment wasn't heavy like it used to be at the house in Sacramento. It wasn't judgmental, but it was vast, almost echoing. The case was closed. The dust had, at least legally, settled. My name was clean. My credit had been restored. The state recognized me as the rightful managing partner for the business I'd given most of my 20s to, before it collapsed under the weight of its own deceit. And yet, I didn't feel victorious. I checked my phone. 23 unread messages. Celesta had sent 3 more overnight. One was a photo of our backyard from years ago. Me helping her garden, both of us smiling. No caption. Another was a paragraph-long apology that started with, "We didn't realize," and ended with, "You know we love you, right?" Vernon's was simpler, just one sentence. "You were the only one who understood." I deleted none of them. But I didn't answer either. Seraphine had sent a voice note 2 days prior. I hadn't played it until now. I pressed it. Her voice was flat, tired. No makeup to the tone. Just raw. "I know you think I never cared. Maybe I didn't care enough. But this ruined me too, you know. I lost everything. And yeah, maybe I deserved some of it. But not all of it. Not like this." The message ended without a goodbye. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I was torn, but because that kind of confession, even stripped bare, still came wearing a mask. I lost everything. This ruined me too. None of it acknowledged what she took, what she rewrote, how she let me disappear in exchange for spotlight. I closed the phone. Slid it face down across the table. Later that afternoon, Deirdre called. "Criminal charges?" she asked, her voice crisp as always. "We're within grounds, the forged loan, the paper trail. Any DA would have enough to proceed." I paused. My hand was steady. My thoughts, clear. "No," I said. "Let them live with what they did. That's heavier than any prison sentence." She didn't push. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." And I was. Not because I forgave them, but because I knew that some prisons are invisible and far more permanent. Vernon would never rebuild that company. Celesta would never blog again without wondering who was watching. Seraphine would never post a leadership quote without hearing my voice in her head. That night, I received an email from a community college in Bend. A professor I'd met through a former client was inviting me to speak to his business ethics class. Just a guest lecture, he said, informal. He'd heard about the case and thought I might have something meaningful to share with his students. I hovered over the reply button for a while, then typed, "Happy to." It wasn't some big re-entry into the world. It was one classroom, 30 students. But it felt like a step that was mine. A year later, almost to the day, I stood in that classroom. Simple chairs, beige walls, fluorescent lights that buzzed quietly. I wore jeans and a navy sweater, no heels, no PowerPoint, just me, a dry erase marker, and a whiteboard that still had notes from the class before mine. I looked out at the room. Some kids were already slouched, phones out. A few leaned forward, waiting. One girl had a notepad open, pen ready, and something in her eyes that reminded me of the version of me who once believed being good meant being silent. I started talking, not about the lawsuit, not about strategy, but about silence. I wasn't betrayed in one day, I told them. I was erased one quiet moment at a time. Every time I said yes when I wanted to say no, every time I smiled and swallowed a correction, every time I stayed behind to fix a mistake I didn't make, just to keep the peace. The room shifted. Phones lowered. One hand went up. A boy in the second row asked, "Would you do it all again?" I didn't answer right away. Then I nodded. I'd walk away sooner. But yes, because now I own myself. Fully. And nothing I lost is worth more than that. After class, one of the students waited behind. She didn't say much, just handed me a folded note. I opened it in the parking lot. "Thank you for making me feel less invisible." I drove home with the windows cracked, the late winter air just cool enough to sting. In the distance, mountains loomed, steady and unbothered, much like the future I no longer feared. This wasn't just a story of revenge, it was about reclamation. And sometimes, justice isn't loud, it's walking away and not looking back. Sometimes, justice doesn't come with applause or closure. It comes in quiet decisions, firm boundaries, and the courage to walk away from what once felt like love. Have you ever had to choose peace over family? Tell me in the comments. Your story might be the one someone else needs to hear. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more real-life stories that speak truth, pain, and healing.